We remember the names: Vanderbilt, Astor, Carnegie, the marble halls, the gilded ballrooms, the manicured lawns stretching toward infinity. But here is what the photographs never captured: the 73 workers required to keep a single estate running. The night soilmen who emptied chamber pots at 4 in the morning. The boiler engineers who worked 16-hour shifts in basement furnace rooms that reached 120 degrees. The invisible army that made paradise possible. This is not the story of the families who owned America's grandest estates. This is the story of the hundreds who built them, maintained them, and kept their secrets. Chapter 1: When Mansions Became Machines. By 1890, the average Gilded Age estate required more workers per acre than a commercial farm. Saw something fundamental changed in American wealth during the 1880s. The mansions that rose from Newport to the Hudson Valley were not simply larger versions of what came before. They were different in kind. They crossed a threshold where a home stopped being a residence and became an operation requiring constant human fuel to function. Consider the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. Construction began in 1889. George Vanderbilt did not commission a large house. He commissioned a facility, 250 rooms spread across 4 acres of floor space, 65 fireplaces that needed daily servicing, a heating system that consumed tons of coal each week, an electrical plant powered by its own generators, a filtration system that pumped water from mountain springs 2 miles away. Yet the house itself sat on 8,000 acres that included working farms, forests, and a private railway spur. This was not architecture. This was infrastructure. The transformation happened quickly. In 1870, a wealthy family might employ 10 household servants. By 1895, estates routinely required 70 to 100 workers for basic operation. The change was not gradual, it was explosive. Between 1880 and 1900, more than 300 estates of comparable scale were built across America. Each one demanded its own private army. The infrastructure these estates required would shock most people today. They were self-contained industrial complexes disguised as country homes. Private gas plants generated lighting fuel. Water pumping stations maintained pressure for indoor plumbing and decorative fountains. Sewage treatment facilities processed waste that could not simply be dumped into rivers without causing scandal. Ice houses held 50 tons harvested from frozen ponds each winter. Greenhouses heated year-round produced fresh flowers and out-of-season fruit. Private dairies, chicken coops, and vegetable gardens supplied most food consumed on the property. Biltmore needed 80 full-time workers, minimum, just to keep basic systems functioning. The estate employed 4 engineers to maintain the electrical and heating plants. 6 men worked the dairy operation. The greenhouse required 3 full-time gardeners. The stables employed 8 workers to maintain horses, carriages, and tack. This was before counting household staff, chambermaids, footmen, and laundresses, kitchen workers, valets. The scale became absurd quickly. Frederick Vanderbilt's estate in Hyde Park, New York, far smaller than Biltmore, still required 54 servants during peak seasons. The Breakers in Newport, a summer cottage used 3 months yearly, employed 40 staff members. William Randolph Hearst's estate in California would eventually require 150 workers at full operation. These were not homes. They were machines that consumed labor and money to produce a single product, the appearance of effortless luxury. The question nobody asked publicly was simple. How did anyone coordinate this impossible complexity? How did you manage 80 people, most living on property, all performing specialized tasks that had to synchronize perfectly? How did you prevent the operation from collapsing into chaos when a single malfunction could cascade through the entire system? The answer was hierarchy, rigid, brutal, absolute. Chapter 2. The hierarchy nobody saw. Inside these estates, your status was determined not by skill, but by how close you came to seeing the family. The estate hierarchy was not simply about rank. It was a complete social system that governed every aspect of worker existence. Where you slept, what you ate, who you could speak to, whether you could marry, whether you could leave. At the top stood the estate manager or superintendent. This man, always a man, earned between $1,500 and $2,000 annually when the average American made $400. He was the general of a private army. He hired workers. He fired them. He set schedules. He allocated budgets, resolved disputes, and reported directly to the estate owner. He lived in his own cottage, ate separately from other staff, and maintained absolute authority over everyone below him. Beneath the superintendent came the specialists. The head gardener commanded crews of 6 to 20 men, depending on ground size. He earned $800 to $1,200 yearly. The chief engineer, responsible for all mechanical systems, earned similar wages. The stable master controlled horse operations. Each specialist commanded his own domain, his own workers, his own budget. They reported to the superintendent, but rarely interacted with each other beyond formal meetings. Then came the household hierarchy, entirely separate from estate operations. The butler stood at the summit of domestic service, and he earned $600 to $1,000 annually. He controlled the male household staff, footmen, valets, hall boys. He managed the wine cellar, supervised formal meals, and served as the family's primary point of contact with the servant world. The housekeeper held equivalent rank over female staff. She controlled chambermaids, ladies' maids, scullery workers, and laundresses. Together, the butler and housekeeper functioned as middle management between the family and the invisible workforce that surrounded them. Below this tier existed the skilled domestics. The lady's maid, personal servant to the estate's lady, earned $400 to $600. The head cook earned similar wages. These workers possessed specific expertise. They were valued. They were noticed. They occasionally spoke directly to family members. Then came everyone else. Chambermaids earned $250 to $300 annually. Footmen slightly more. Kitchen maids less. Scullery workers, the lowest household position, earned $180 for 16-hour days of washing dishes, scrubbing floors, and emptying chamber pots. Hall boys, children as young as 12, earned $120 to run messages, polish boots, and carry coal buckets. The hierarchy determined everything. Upper servants ate different food than lower servants. They had separate dining rooms. The butler and housekeeper each had private sitting rooms. Ladies' maids had individual bedrooms. Chambermaids slept 4 to a room. Scullery workers slept in basement dormitories or attic spaces with no heat. Physical space reinforced every distinction. Most estates built elaborate tunnel systems so lower servants could move through the property without being seen. At Biltmore, servants used separate staircases hidden behind walls. At the breakers, staff corridors ran behind family rooms, allowing workers to enter, clean, and exit without ever appearing in family sightlines. Certain areas were absolutely forbidden. A scullery maid caught in the family wing could be fired immediately. The system created tribes within a single property. Upper servants identified with the family, seeing themselves as professionals distinct from common labor. They dressed better. They spoke more formally. They maintained distance from lower staff to preserve their own status. Middle-tier workers competed desperately for promotion, knowing that a position as lady's maid or valet offered escape from the brutal physical labor of the bottom ranks. At the bottom, workers simply endured. A scullery maid at the breakers described washing dishes from 6 in the morning until midnight during summer parties. She never saw the guests. She never entered the main rooms. She washed dishes, scrubbed pots, and slept 4 hours before starting again. She was 15 years old. The hierarchy prevented rebellion through division. Upper servants had no interest in challenging a system that elevated them. Lower servants were too exhausted and isolated to organize. The few who complained found themselves dismissed and blacklisted. Estate owners shared information about problem workers. One estate's troublemaker could never find work at another, but the hierarchy served one purpose above all others. It created a buffer between the family and the reality of their own operation. The lady of the house instructed the housekeeper. The housekeeper instructed the head housemaid. The head housemaid instructed the chambermaids. The chambermaids instructed the scullery workers. By the time the lady's desire for fresh flowers reached the teenage girl scrubbing the greenhouse floor, it had passed through 5 layers of human translation. The family never had to see how their comfort was actually produced. They lived in a world where fires appeared already burning, meals arrived perfectly prepared, and gardens bloomed without visible effort. The hierarchy made this possible by organizing invisible labor into a machine that processed human exhaustion into seamless luxury. And the machine worked perfectly, until the day nobody wanted to be part of it anymore. The Chapter 3, the perfect day that never existed. To create the illusion of a single perfect morning required coordination that began 18 hours earlier. 4 o'clock in the morning at a major estate. Complete darkness. The night watchman has walked his final round. Now the transformation begins. The hall boys arrive first. Their job is fire. By 6 o'clock, 30 fireplaces must be burning throughout the house. Each fireplace requires specific preparation. Old ash removed, grates cleaned, kindling arranged. Coal delivered from basement bunkers using servants' stairs. The boys work in silence, moving through dark rooms with practiced efficiency. By the time the family wakes at 8, every room will be warm, and they will never see the boys who made it possible. 4:30. The kitchen erupts into motion. The head cook arrived at 4 to inspect deliveries. Fresh milk from the estate dairy, still warm from morning milking. Eggs from the chicken coops. Vegetables from the kitchen garden. Bread from the estate bakery, baked overnight so it arrives at breakfast still warm. The kitchen staff numbers 8 for a typical morning, 12 if guests are present. They work in absolute hierarchy. The head cook directs. The sous chef executes. Kitchen maids prepare vegetables. Scullery workers scrub everything. 5 o'clock. The chambermaids begin. Each is responsible for specific rooms. They work in pairs. One carries the coal scuttle, one carries the cleaning basket. They enter each bedroom, refresh the fire, empty chamber pots, straighten furniture, and exit before the room's occupant stirs. Later, after breakfast, they will return to make beds, clean thoroughly, and prepare evening fires. For now, they create the illusion that rooms maintain themselves. 5:30. Outside, the grounds crew has been working for an hour. Paths swept clear of leaves. Gravel driveways raked smooth. Decorative fountains inspected for debris. The head gardener walks the property with a notebook, marking tasks for his crew. 6 workers will spend the day on routine maintenance. 2 more will cut fresh flowers for the house, following a written order from the housekeeper specifying which varieties and colors for each room. 6 o'clock. The stable master supervises morning care for 12 horses. Each horse brushed, fed, watered, and exercised. Carriages cleaned and inspected. Tack polished. By 9 o'clock, when the family might require transportation, everything must be ready for immediate use. 7 o'clock. The laundresses have been working since 5. Estate laundry operations processed 150 to 200 pieces daily in a large household. Bed linens, table linens, clothing, towels, everything washed by hand using mangles and coppers, drying rooms heated by dedicated boilers, ironing performed with heavy flat irons heated on stoves. A single tablecloth could require an hour to iron properly. The laundry operation alone employed 4 to 6 women working 12-hour shifts. 7:30. The butler supervises the footman setting the breakfast table. Each place setting follows precise rules. Distance between fork tines measured exactly, crystal arranged by size, fresh flowers in low arrangements so guests can see each other across the table. The butler personally inspects every glass for spots. A single smudge earns a footman a reprimand. 8 o'clock, the family descends for breakfast. The meal appears effortlessly, perfectly timed, beautifully presented. Hot food, hot. Cold food, cold. The footmen serve in synchronized motion, each performing his role in the silent ballet of formal dining. The family eats. The family converses. The family never glimpses the 40 people who made this single hour possible. After breakfast, the operation continues. The lady of the house tours the gardens with the head gardener, discussing seasonal displays. She does not see the worker repairing irrigation pipes. The gentleman inspects the stables, admiring his horses. He does not see the stable boy shoveling manure from the stalls. The children play on manicured lawns. They do not see the gardener who spent 3 hours that morning making the grass appear naturally perfect. Lunch, tea, dinner. Each meal requires the same invisible coordination. Each room the family enters has been prepared in advance. Each comfort they enjoy has been orchestrated by workers they will never meet. By 10 o'clock in the evening, the family retires. The lady's maid helps her mistress undress, brushes her hair, prepares her night clothes. The valet performs the same service for the master. Downstairs, the remaining staff cleans the dinner service, prepares tomorrow's breakfast, and banks the fires. Midnight. The night watchman begins his rounds. He will walk the property every 2 hours, checking doors and windows, all watching for fire. He is the last worker awake. In 6 hours, the hall boys will arrive, and the entire cycle will begin again. This was the perfect day, seamless, beautiful, sustainable. Except it was not sustainable, not remotely. The perfect day required 60 people working in absolute synchronization. It required every worker to perform their role without error. It required no illness, no exhaustion, no human failure. It required workers to accept brutal hours, minimal pay, and complete invisibility as the permanent conditions of their existence. The perfect day never existed. What existed was the constant desperate effort to maintain the illusion that it did. And that effort was killing everyone involved. Chapter 4. What the photographs never showed. For every image of a pristine lawn, there existed a boiler room that photographs were forbidden to capture. The estate photography of the Gilded Age created a visual record of paradise. Albums show marble staircases, manicured gardens, and drawing rooms decorated with museum-quality art. What they do not show are the spaces where the paradise was actually manufactured. Descend into the basement of the breakers. The family rooms above feature 14-foot ceilings and hand-carved oak. Below exists a different world. The boiler room stretches 40 feet long. 4 massive boilers, each the size of a small automobile, provide heat and hot water for the entire house. Coal bunkers hold 200 tons. Workers feed the boilers every 4 hours around the clock. In winter, the room reaches 120 degrees. Workers labor in undershirts, shoveling coal into furnace mouths that glow orange. The boiler room at Biltmore was even more elaborate. 6 boilers heated 250,000 square feet. The coal delivery system alone required 3 full-time workers. Coal arrived by railcar at the estate's private spur. Workers transferred it to carts, rolled it through tunnels, and dumped it into massive bunkers. During peak winter months, the estate consumed 5 tons of coal daily. The workers who fed the boilers breathed air thick with coal dust. Many developed respiratory disease before age 40. But the boilers were just the beginning. Every estate luxury required hidden infrastructure that consumed labor and generated waste at industrial scale. Ice. Before refrigeration, estates required constant ice for food storage and chilled drinks. The ice houses at major estates held 50 to 70 tons harvested from frozen ponds each January. Teams of workers cut ice into blocks, loaded them onto sleds, and packed them in sawdust for storage. The work was dangerous. Men fell through ice. Blocks crushed feet and hands. The ice house at Frederick Vanderbilt's estate measured 30 feet by 40 feet, built entirely underground for insulation. Workers descended into darkness to chip ice from blocks that had frozen together, breathing air cold enough to sear lungs. Water. Estates required massive amounts of water for indoor plumbing, decorative fountains, and garden irrigation. Most built private pumping stations powered by steam engines or early electric motors. The Biltmore system pumped water from mountain springs 2 miles away, storing it in a reservoir that held 150,000 gallons. 3 engineers maintained the pumping station, monitoring pressure, repairing pipes, and preventing system failures that would leave the entire estate without water. Sewage. The waste generated by a household of 80 to 100 people had to go somewhere. Early estates used cesspools that required frequent pumping. Later estates built septic systems that processed waste on site. The breaker's sewage system dumped partially treated waste directly into the ocean. Biltmore built a treatment facility that attempted proper processing, but still contaminated local streams. The workers who maintained these systems worked in conditions that would horrify modern inspectors. They entered sewage tanks to remove blockages. They repaired broken pipes while standing in waste. They earned $300 annually for work that marked them as untouchable to other servants. The environmental cost of estate operations remains underappreciated. A single large estate consumed more coal annually than a town of 1,000 people. The Vanderbilt estate in Hyde Park burned 1,000 tons of coal yearly just for heating. That coal produced tons of ash that had to be removed and dumped. It generated smoke that blackened buildings and killed vegetation downwind. The decorative fountains at major estates consumed water at rates that lowered local water tables, affecting nearby farms. Then came the human cost. Boiler room workers developed chronic lung disease from coal dust exposure. The average career length was 15 years before respiratory failure forced retirement. Most died within 5 years of stopping work. Stable workers suffered frequent injuries from horses, broken bones, crushed hands. One stable worker at Biltmore lost 3 fingers when a horse panicked and slammed him against a stall. He received no compensation. He continued working because he needed the $250 annual salary. Domestic servants faced different dangers: chronic exhaustion from 16-hour days, repetitive strain injuries from carrying coal buckets upstairs, burns from handling hot irons and cooking equipment. Scullery workers developed dermatitis from constant exposure to harsh soaps and scalding water. Chambermaids suffered knee damage from scrubbing floors on hands and knees. The estates maintained no medical facilities beyond basic first aid. Workers who became too ill or injured to work were dismissed. Estate owners provided no pensions, no disability payments, no support for families left destitute when a worker died. The system consumed workers and discarded them when they wore out. The photographs showed none of this. Photographers captured the drawing rooms, the gardens, the architectural details. They never descended to the boiler rooms. They never documented the coal bunkers, the ice houses, the sewage systems. They never photographed the worker dormitories with 8 men sharing rooms designed for 4. They never showed the exhausted faces of scullery maids after 18-hour shifts. The photographs created a deliberate fiction. They presented estates as natural paradises where luxury simply existed without cost or effort. They erased the machinery that produced the paradise and the workers who operated that machinery. But the workers existed whether they were photographed or not. They lived in those boiler rooms. They breathed that coal dust. They carried that water. They shoveled that waste. They made paradise possible while living in conditions that paradise was designed to escape. The contradiction was unsustainable. These workers maintained wealth and beauty while experiencing poverty and exhaustion. They created environments of perfect comfort while living in discomfort. They generated the appearance of effortless luxury through backbreaking effort. And they were beginning to realize they had other options. Chapter 5. The Economics of Invisible Labor. By 1900, maintaining an estate cost more per year than building most houses in America. The numbers were absurd from the beginning. Estate owners knew this. They built anyway. Consider the annual operating costs of a large estate around 1900. The figures come from surviving account books and correspondence. They are not estimates. They are the actual amounts families paid to keep their properties functioning. Staffing costs dominated every budget. At Biltmore, George Vanderbilt employed 80 workers at peak operation. Wages ranged from the estate manager at $2,000 annually down to hall boys at $120. The total annual payroll exceeded $40,000. This was just salaries. Add housing, food, uniforms, and medical care for staff, and labor costs reached $50,000 yearly. Grounds maintenance consumed another massive budget. The head gardener at a major estate earned $1,000. His crew of 12 to 20 workers earned $300 to $500 each. Annual grounds labor costs at estates like Biltmore and the Vanderbilt property in Hyde Park ran $8,000 to $12,000. This covered only wages. Seeds, fertilizer, new plantings, and equipment pushed total grounds expenses to $15,000 annually. Stable operations cost similarly. A major estate maintained 10 to 15 horses. Each horse consumed roughly $50 worth of feed yearly. Tack, veterinary care, and equipment added hundreds more. The stable worker wages for a crew of 6 to 8 men totaled $3,000 to $4,000 annually. Total stable expenses reached $8,000 yearly at estates that maintained proper equestrian facilities. Heating costs became astronomical as estates grew. Biltmore consumed 1,200 tons of coal annually at peak operation. Coal cost roughly $3 per ton delivered. That was $3,600 just for fuel. Add wages for the workers who fed the boilers, maintained the equipment, and removed ash, and heating costs exceeded $6,000 yearly. Food costs shocked even the families who paid them. A household of 80 people consumed massive quantities. Estates maintained private dairies, chicken coops, and vegetable gardens specifically to reduce food costs. Even with on-site production, purchased food for a large estate ran $5,000 to $8,000 annually. This was $1,900 when the average American family spent $200 yearly on food. The total was staggering. A large estate in full operation cost between $70,000 and $150,000 annually just for basic maintenance and operations. This was not construction costs. This was not purchasing art or furniture. This was simply the cost of keeping the lights on and the workers paid. Compare this to average American incomes. In 1900, the typical American family earned $400 to $500 annually. A skilled craftsman might make $1,000. A doctor or lawyer earned $2,000 to $3,000. The annual operating cost of a single estate exceeded the lifetime earnings of most Americans. The mathematics were impossible unless you possessed industrial fortune. George Vanderbilt inherited wealth from his grandfather Cornelius, who died in 1877 worth $95 million. Even with that fortune, Biltmore's operating costs consumed nearly 1% of the family's capital annually. Smaller fortunes could not sustain such spending. Estate owners tried various strategies to reduce costs. Some closed properties seasonally, operating only during summer or winter months. This reduced staffing needs, but created new problems. Closed estates still required maintenance. Skeleton crews of 10 to 15 workers remained year-round to prevent decay. The savings were minimal. Some estates attempted to generate revenue. They sold excess farm production. They bred horses commercially. They rented hunting rights. These efforts rarely covered more than 10 to 15% of operating costs. Estates were not businesses. They were consumption machines. The question became obvious. Why did families continue funding operations that made no economic sense? The answer was equally obvious: status. An estate was not a home. It was a statement. It announced to the world that you possessed wealth beyond measure. It demonstrated that you could afford to spend $100,000 yearly on a property you occupied 3 months. It proved you had escaped the constraints that governed normal economic life. The estate was conspicuous consumption at maximum scale. Every room, every worker, in every perfectly manicured acre announced, "I am so wealthy that I can afford to waste money," but the economics contained a fatal flaw. The statement only worked if society agreed it was impressive. The moment society stopped caring about vast estates, the moment the public decided that such displays were wasteful rather than admirable, the entire system would collapse. That moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. Immigration restrictions passed in the 1890s reduced the flow of European workers willing to accept servant positions. The first generation of American-born children from immigrant families rejected domestic service. They wanted factory jobs, office jobs, anything that offered more freedom and dignity than estate work. By 1910, estate owners faced a crisis. They could not find workers at any price. Newspaper advertisements promised good wages, comfortable housing, and pleasant working conditions. The advertisements went unanswered. Young Americans wanted nothing to do with servant hierarchy and 16-hour days. Wages began rising. Competition for scarce workers forced estate owners to increase salaries. A chambermaid who earned $250 in 1900 commanded $400 by 1915. A head gardener's salary rose from $1,000 to $1,500. Labor costs, already massive, increased by 30 to 50% in 15 years. Quality declined simultaneously. The workers' estates could hire were often inexperienced, unskilled, and uninterested in the traditional standards. Gardens were maintained adequately rather than perfectly, and service became acceptable rather than flawless. The machine that had operated with precision began running roughly. The economics that had always been absurd became impossible. You could not maintain an estate to the old standards at the new costs. You could not find workers willing to operate the system the way it was designed to function. You could not sustain spending that now exceeded $200,000 annually for seasonal properties. The estates had become financial sinkholes. They consumed capital without generating return. They required constant infusions of wealth to prevent collapse, and the families who owned them were beginning to realize that the money might be better spent elsewhere. The pride of ownership was fading. The status display no longer impressed, and the impossible economics finally became too impossible to justify. The machine was breaking down, and nobody knew how to fix it. Chapter 6: When workers started disappearing. The first sign of collapse was not financial crisis, but the slow realization that nobody wanted these jobs anymore. The crisis began quietly around 1910. Estate managers started noticing a pattern. Positions stayed vacant longer. Applicants were fewer and less qualified. Workers left after months instead of staying for years. The supply of servants that had seemed infinite was evaporating. The reasons were simple. The American economy offered better options. Factory work paid more for shorter hours. A factory worker in 1910 earned $450 to $600 annually for 10-hour days. A chambermaid earned $300 for 16-hour days. The choice was obvious. Office work offered even better prospects. Secretaries, clerks, and telephone operators earned $500 to $700 with respectable hours and no requirement to live in employer housing. Young women who once had no choice except domestic service now had alternatives. The automobile industry created entirely new job categories. Mechanics, drivers, and garage workers earned good wages without the servant stigma. Young men who might have become stable workers or footmen went to work in automobile factories instead. Immigration restriction dealt the final blow. The Immigration Act of 1891 introduced new controls. Later restrictions in 1917 and 1924 reduced European immigration to a trickle. Estate owners had relied on a constant supply of newly arrived Europeans desperate for any work. That supply disappeared. American-born workers rejected servant positions as degrading. Estates found themselves competing for a shrinking pool of labor. The desperation became visible. Estate owners who had once selected workers from dozens of applicants now begged anyone to apply. Newspaper advertisements grew more elaborate. They promised private rooms, previously available only to upper servants. They offered higher wages. They emphasized time off and leisure privileges. The advertisements portrayed estate work as desirable, comfortable, even pleasant. Nobody believed them. Young Americans had heard the truth from former servants. Hiring agents began scouring immigrant ships, meeting newcomers before they left the docks, and offering immediate employment. Estates sent recruiters to rural areas promising country girls that estate work offered better conditions than farm labor. The recruiters emphasized clean indoor work, regular meals, and interaction with wealthy families. They minimized the 16-hour days, the rigid hierarchy, and the requirement to remain invisible. Some estates began hiring married couples for positions previously held by single workers. The husband might work as gardener or handyman, the wife as cook or housekeeper. The couple received a cottage and combined salary of $900 to $1,200. It was cheaper than hiring two skilled workers separately, and easier than finding single workers willing to live in servants' quarters. Quality collapsed faster than anyone anticipated, and the workers' estates could attract were often inexperienced and unmotivated. A head gardener hired in 1915 might have 3 years' experience instead of the 20 years that was standard in 1900. Chambermaids arrived without training and had to be taught basic skills. Footmen lacked the polish and deportment that formal service required. Service standards that had been absolute became negotiable. Estates began accepting dust in corners, wrinkles in tablecloths, and delays in service. They had no choice. The alternative was no workers at all. The staffing crisis hit hardest at seasonal estates. Properties occupied only 3 months yearly could not compete with year-round employment elsewhere. The breakers in Newport required 40 workers for the summer season. By 1915, and the estate struggled to hire 25. The family adjusted by reducing the scale of entertaining, closing sections of the house, and accepting lower standards. Some estates experimented with partial mechanization. They installed electric dumbwaiters to reduce the need for workers carrying trays between floors. They bought carpet sweepers to make cleaning faster. They reduced the number of horses, cutting stable staff from 8 to 4. These measures helped, but could not solve the fundamental problem. The estates had been designed for abundant, cheap labor. When labor became scarce and expensive, the entire system failed. The most telling sign was wage inflation. By 1920, estate workers earned double their 1900 salaries. A chambermaid made $500 to $600. A head gardener commanded $2,000 to $2,500. Labor costs that had consumed $50,000 annually now exceeded $100,000. And still, estates could not hire enough workers. The families faced impossible choices: pay vastly more for inferior service, reduce operations to match available staff, or close the estate entirely. Many chose closure. Between 1910 and 1920, dozens of major estates shut down seasonal operations. They retained minimal staffs to prevent decay, but stopped attempting full operation. The grand entertaining that had justified the properties ceased. The houses became expensive burdens maintained out of family pride rather than actual use. World War I accelerated every trend. Workers left estate employment for war industries that paid double or triple servant wages. Men enlisted in military service, removing them from the labor market entirely. Women found work in munitions factories, offices, and shops. When the war ended in 1918, almost none of them returned to domestic service. The workers had discovered something that terrified estate owners. They had options. They could refuse. They could demand better conditions. They could leave for other work. The absolute control that had characterized the estate system evaporated. Workers were no longer desperate. They could not be bullied or threatened into accepting conditions they found intolerable. The power had shifted. By 1920, the labor shortage had become a crisis that no amount of money could solve. Estates that once operated with 80 workers made do with 40. Those 40 worked longer hours, maintained lower standards, and knew they could leave for better opportunities whenever they chose. The machine that had run on human fuel was running out of fuel, and there was no replacement available. Chapter 7. The Great Reduction. Between 1920 and 1930, the average estate workforce shrank by 60%, and nothing was ever the same. The dismantling happened faster than the construction. Estates that had taken a decade to build at full operation were reduced to skeleton crews in months. The greenhouse closures came first. Greenhouses required constant labor and massive heating costs. 3 workers minimum to maintain plants year-round. Coal consumption to keep temperatures above freezing in winter. The annual costs of $5,000 for facilities that produced flowers. The economics made no sense when commercial florists could supply cut flowers for hundreds of dollars yearly. One by one, estate greenhouses went cold. At Biltmore, the massive conservatory that once held tropical plants year-round closed in 1923. The heating system was shut down. The glass panels were boarded over. The 3 gardeners who had tended exotic orchids and forced bulbs were dismissed. They had worked there for 15 years. The stables followed. Automobiles had made horses obsolete for transportation. Estates no longer needed 8 stable workers, 12 horses, and multiple carriages. The conversion happened brutally. Horses were sold at auction. Carriages went to dealers or were simply abandoned. The elaborate tack rooms filled with hand-tooled leather sat unused. Stable buildings were converted to garages for automobiles that required 1 mechanic instead of 8 grooms. The Vanderbilt estate in Hyde Park sold its entire stable operation in 1924. 15 horses, 6 carriages, tools and equipment accumulated over 40 years. The stable staff of 7 workers received 2 weeks' notice. Most found work at commercial stables or left the area entirely. The stable building stood empty for a decade before being demolished. Private dairies closed next. Commercial dairy operations could deliver milk cheaper than estate dairies could produce it. The 6 workers required for dairy operation earned wages that exceeded the cost of purchased milk by 3 to 1. Estates that had maintained herds of Jersey cows for fresh milk sold the cattle, dismissed the workers, and contracted with commercial suppliers. The human cost of each closure was identical. Workers who had spent decades in specialized positions found themselves obsolete. A head gardener at 55 with 30 years' experience maintaining estate grounds had no transferable skills. He could not simply become a commercial gardener. His expertise was in large-scale estate operations that no longer existed. He faced unemployment or dramatic demotion to manual labor at half his previous salary. The psychological devastation was worse. These workers had identified completely with their positions. The head gardener was not a man who maintained gardens. He was a head gardener. His status, his identity, his entire sense of self-worth derived from managing elaborate estate grounds. When the position disappeared, he lost more than income. He lost meaning. estate managers faced the cruelest choices. They decided which operations to close, which workers to dismiss, which traditions to abandon. They walked through properties they had maintained for decades, mentally calculating which sections could be mothballed without total collapse. The decisions followed brutal logic. Close anything that generated cost without status value. Greenhouses produced flowers but did not impress visitors. Close them. Dairies produced milk, but nobody saw the operation. Close them. Extensive kitchen gardens required workers, but could be replaced by purchased vegetables. Close them. Focus all remaining resources on the visible aspects, the main gardens that guests saw, the primary buildings, the basic staff necessary to maintain appearance. Everything else became negotiable. The breakers reduced its summer staff from 40 workers in 1920 to 22 workers in 1928. Sections of the house were closed. Rooms that once gleamed with daily cleaning accumulated dust. Gardens that had been replanted seasonally were simplified to permanent plantings requiring less maintenance. The estate still looked impressive to casual visitors. Anyone who had seen it at peak operation noticed the decline immediately. Biltmore made even more dramatic cuts. The ground staff that once numbered 20 shrank to 8. Whole sections of the formal gardens were allowed to naturalize. Paths that had been immaculate became weed-infested. The estate that George Vanderbilt designed as America's finest began its long deterioration. The cottage communities around major estates dissolved. These had been small villages of worker housing, often 50 to 70 cottages for married workers and their families. As positions disappeared, cottages emptied. Families who had lived on estate grounds for generations packed their belongings and left. The communities that had supported workers, schools for their children, and small social worlds collapsed within years. Some estates attempted creative solutions. They converted to institutional use while families still lived there. They opened sections to tourists for admission fees. They rented facilities for weddings and events. These measures generated small revenues but could not cover operating costs. An estate that cost $150,000 annually to operate at full scale could not be sustained on tourism revenues of $5,000. The families recognized reality slowly. These properties were no longer symbols of success. They were burdens, expensive, deteriorating burdens that consumed wealth without generating satisfaction. The emotional shift was profound. The previous generation had built these estates with pride, seeing them as permanent monuments to family achievement. The current generation saw only expense and obligation. They no longer wanted to spend months at sprawling properties. They wanted smaller, manageable homes. They wanted freedom from constant maintenance crises. The reductions continued through the 1920s. Each year brought new closures, new dismissals, new abandonments. Properties designed for 80 workers operated with 30, then 20, then 15. Standards declined in perfect correlation with staffing levels. The machine ground to a halt, one component at a time. By 1930, the estates that remained in private hands bore little resemblance to their earlier incarnations. They were shadows, pale imitations operating on minimal staffing with reduced scope. The grand vision had failed, not in a single dramatic collapse, but through slow starvation of the resources required to sustain it. The workers who remained faced a different nightmare. They were the last survivors of a dying system, expected to maintain impossibly large operations with inadequate support. And they knew the end was coming. Chapter 8. When Paradise Became a Prison. The Depression did not destroy these estates. It revealed that they had been dying for 20 years. October 1929. The stock market collapsed. Within months, family fortunes that had seemed infinite shrank dramatically. The families who owned grand estates faced a new reality. They could not sell properties nobody wanted to buy. They could not maintain them without capital. They could not abandon them without social scandal. The estates became traps. Consider the economics. A major estate worth $5 million in 1925 might find no buyers at any price in 1932. The annual maintenance costs of $75,000 remained constant whether the family occupied the property or not. Closing completely would save labor costs, but guarantee rapid deterioration. An empty estate could become unsalvageable within 5 years. Families tried desperately to sell. They reduced asking prices by 50, then 70, then 80%. They offered financing. They suggested conversions to institutions or hotels. Few buyers materialized. Who wanted to purchase a property requiring $100,000 yearly to operate properly when they could buy a comfortable mansion for $50,000 that needed minimal staff? The solution was grotesque reduction. Operate the estate on 1/10 of its designed workforce and accept total decline in everything. The breakers attempted to operate with a summer staff of 12 workers to maintain a property designed for 40. The impossibility was obvious immediately. Rooms went uncleaned for weeks. Gardens became overgrown. Basic maintenance was deferred indefinitely. The staff worked desperate hours trying to preserve appearance in the few areas visitors might see while allowing everything else to decay. Biltmore reduced to a skeleton crew of 15 permanent workers. 15 people attempting to maintain 250 rooms and 8,000 acres. They chose which buildings to heat, which gardens to maintain, which systems to keep functioning. The rest was simply abandoned to weather and time. The staff who remained endured conditions that resembled disaster management more than estate operation. The head gardener at Biltmore in 1935 supervised 2 workers instead of 20. They maintained only the gardens immediately visible from the main approach. Everything else reverted to forest and weed. The gardener was 60 years old. He had worked at Biltmore for 35 years. He watched his life's work disappear under vines and saplings while lacking the resources to prevent it. The buildings deteriorated in predictable patterns. Roofs leaked. Water damage spread from attics downward. Plaster cracked and fell. Windows broke and were not replaced, allowing weather inside. Heating systems failed from lack of maintenance. Rooms that had been showcases became damaged shells. Some families made desperate attempts at revenue. They opened estates to tourists, charging admission to tour rooms and gardens. The revenue was pitiful. A property might generate $2,000 to $5,000 annually from tourism, while requiring $50,000 for minimal maintenance. The tourists walked through deteriorating spaces and marveling at former grandeur while standing in rooms with stained ceilings and warped floors. Other families attempted institutional conversion. They offered estates to universities, hospitals, or charitable organizations. Many were refused. Institutions recognized the same reality families faced. These properties were too expensive to operate for any purpose. Taking one as a gift meant accepting a financial burden that would consume resources indefinitely. Some successful conversions occurred. Biltmore eventually transitioned to a self-sustaining tourist operation, but only after decades of family subsidy. Other estates became conference centers or museums after extensive public fundraising. These success stories were exceptions. Most estates that left private hands became government property or were demolished. The demolitions began in the 1930s and accelerated through the 1950s. Estates that had cost millions to build were torn down because no viable use existed. The Stanford White Mansion in New York City, completed in 1905, was demolished in 1925. The Schwab Mansion on Riverside Drive, one of the largest private residences ever built in Manhattan, was demolished in 1948. Dozens of Newport cottages were torn down in the 1950s and 60s. The workers who had dedicated careers to these properties watched them die. The head housekeeper at a demolished estate in 1938 had worked there for 27 years. She received 2 months' notice and no pension. She was 53 years old. Her skills maintaining a 40-room mansion had no application in the modern world. She found work as a cleaning woman in an office building, earning half her previous salary. The final indignity was the conversion to caretaker couples. Estates that once employed 80 workers were maintained by a single couple living alone in massive properties. The husband handled basic maintenance and grounds work. The wife cleaned a few rooms and prepared meals. They lived in the main house because the worker cottages had been demolished or abandoned. These couples inhabited ghost worlds. They walked through vast empty buildings, cleaning rooms nobody entered, maintaining gardens nobody saw. They were the last witnesses to operations they could no longer perform. The husband might be a former gardener who remembered when 20 men maintained the grounds. Now he mowed a small area alone and watched the rest turn to wilderness. The wife might be a former chambermaid who once cleaned with a staff of 8. Now she dusted a few rooms and closed off entire wings. The psychological toll was severe. These couples lived in isolation, surrounded by decay. They witnessed the slow destruction of places they had known at their peak. They worked without support, without hope of improvement, maintaining minimal standards in properties designed for excellence. Some went insane. The isolation, the futility, the constant confrontation with decay, and the absence of human contact broke them. One caretaker couple in New Hampshire was found living in 2 rooms of a 30-room mansion, having abandoned the rest to complete deterioration. They had stopped trying. They simply existed in the ruins of someone else's dream. The estates had become prisons for everyone involved. The families could not escape the financial burden. The workers could not maintain impossible operations. The properties themselves became monuments to failed ambition and unsustainable excess. The paradise was dead. What remained were the corpses, slowly decaying, and the few traumatized survivors who could not leave. Chapter 9. The Last Workers Standing. By 1950, you could find estates where a single elderly gardener was the only person who remembered how anything worked. James Morrison was 71 years old in 1952. He had worked at a Hudson Valley estate for 53 years. He started as a garden boy in 1899, advanced to gardener, and eventually became head gardener, supervising a crew of 18 men. By 1952, he worked alone. Morrison still arrived each morning at 6. He walked the same paths he had walked for half a century. He pruned the roses he had planted 30 years earlier. He maintained a 1/4 acre of formal garden that once had been 20 acres of showpiece plantings. The rest had returned to forest. He was the archive. He knew where the underground irrigation pipes ran, though they no longer functioned. He remembered the locations of buried foundations from demolished greenhouses. He could recite the botanical names of every plant that had ever grown in the gardens, though most species were long gone. He knew how the estate operated at peak, though that knowledge was now useless. Morrison worked alone because he was the last person willing to do the work. The estate's owner had died in 1948. The heir lived in New York and visited twice yearly. Morrison received a salary of $1,200 annually to maintain minimal appearance. He had no staff, no equipment beyond basic hand tools, and no possibility of restoring what had been lost. He continued working because it was his identity. He was the head gardener. The fact that there were no other gardeners did not change his understanding of himself. He would maintain his gardens until death or dismissal. He was not unique. Across America, the final generation of estate workers performed similar roles. They were living links to operations that had vanished. They preserved knowledge nobody wanted. They maintained standards that made no economic sense. They did this because they knew nothing else. Margaret Hayes worked as a housekeeper at a Massachusetts estate from 1923 until 1968, 45 years. She started with a household staff of 12. By 1960, she worked alone. She cleaned 6 rooms of a 42-room house. The other rooms were closed, furniture covered with sheets, decay advancing slowly. Hayes maintained routines that no longer made sense. She polished silver that was never used. She washed windows in rooms nobody entered. She followed cleaning schedules designed for properties with full staffing. When asked why she continued this futile work, she had no answer. It was what she had always done. These workers became estate managers by default. With families absent and no supervisors remaining, they made decisions about property maintenance, which buildings to heat, which systems to maintain, which repairs were essential versus which could be deferred. They managed budgets, paid utility bills, and dealt with contractors. They had been trained as workers. Circumstances forced them to become administrators. The knowledge they possessed was extraordinary and useless. A boiler room worker who had maintained complex steam systems for 40 years understood machinery that no longer existed. His expertise died with him because nobody valued it enough to preserve it. A head housekeeper who knew the proper methods for cleaning gilded surfaces, maintaining antique textiles, and preserving decorative plaster worked alone in buildings where those skills went unused. Some workers documented their knowledge, writing detailed accounts of estate operations. Most did not. They assumed someone would care. They believed their experience had value. They were wrong. When they retired or died, their knowledge disappeared. The institutional memory of how these places functioned vanished with the last workers who had operated them at peak capacity. The final generation faced a cruel paradox. They were the only people who understood these estates completely. They were also completely powerless to restore them. They knew exactly how things should work while watching systems fail, buildings deteriorate, and operations collapse. They were witnesses to a disaster they could not prevent. The loneliness was devastating. These workers had spent careers in communities of dozens of fellow staff. They had shared dormitories, eaten meals together, celebrated holidays as estate families. By the 1950s, they worked in complete isolation. Days passed without human conversation. They ate alone, slept alone, and worked alone in properties designed to house hundreds. Some maintained hope that conditions would improve. They believed families would return, that wealth would be restored, that proper staffing would resume. This hope was delusional but necessary. Without it, they had to confront the reality that their life's work was meaningless, that everything they had built would decay, that their expertise would die unused. Others accepted futility with resignation. They continued working because they had nowhere else to go. The estate provided housing and minimal salary. They were too old to find new employment. They stayed because leaving meant homelessness and destitution. The saddest cases were workers who had invested personal savings in estate maintenance. A gardener might use his own money to purchase plants or tools when the estate budget was cut. A housekeeper might pay for cleaning supplies from her salary. They subsidized the decay of properties that did not belong to them, trying desperately to preserve something that was already lost. When these workers finally retired or died, the estates often closed immediately. Their departure revealed how much had been sustained through individual effort rather than systematic maintenance. A property that seemed functional with an elderly caretaker couple collapsed into ruin within months of their absence. James Morrison died in 1956. He had worked until 3 weeks before his death, still maintaining his small garden plot. The estate was sold to developers within a year. The gardens he had maintained for 53 years were bulldozed for suburban housing. No memorial acknowledged his existence. The development was not named for him. No plaque explained that these streets covered ground he had tended for half a century. Margaret Hayes retired in 1968. The estate she had cleaned for 45 years was donated to a university. The university converted it to administrative offices. Hayes attended the dedication ceremony. Nobody mentioned her name. Nobody acknowledged the decades she had spent maintaining the property. She was invisible in retirement as she had been invisible in service. The last workers standing were archives that nobody read. They held knowledge that nobody valued. They preserved traditions that nobody remembered. And when they died, they took with them the final authentic memory of how America's grand estates actually functioned. All that remained was ruins and silence. Chapter 10: What Survives in the Tunnels. When tourists walk through these estates today, 90% of the original operation remains hidden beneath their feet. The Breakers opens to tourists at 10 in the morning. Visitors pay admission, receive audio guides, and tour rooms that once housed the Vanderbilt family. They marvel at marble imported from Italy, gilding applied by European craftsmen, and furniture that cost more than most houses. They take photographs. They comment on the excess. They never see the tunnels. Below the first floor exists a parallel world, as service corridors connect every major room, allowing workers to move unseen. The kitchen tunnel runs 150 feet from food preparation areas to the dining room, wide enough for 2 workers to pass carrying trays, tall enough to walk upright, completely invisible from the rooms above. The tunnels at the Breakers remain intact. Museums use them for storage now, maintenance equipment, folding chairs for special events, boxes of promotional materials. Tourists never enter. The tunnels are not part of the official tour. They reveal too much about how the estate actually functioned. At Biltmore, the tunnel system is even more extensive. Workers could travel from the basement boiler rooms to third-floor bedrooms without ever appearing in family spaces. Separate staircases, hidden doorways, and service corridors created an invisible infrastructure that matched the visible estate in complexity. These spaces survive complete with original features. The massive coal bunkers that once held 200 tons still exist. empty and silent. The boiler rooms contain the original equipment, rusted and cold. The servants' dining hall remains with tables and benches intact. The dormitories where lower staff slept still have hooks for hanging clothes and shelves for personal belongings. What has disappeared is operational knowledge. Museum staff can show visitors the tunnels, but cannot explain the systems that govern their use. They can point to the boilers, but cannot describe the 4-hour feeding cycles. They can display the servants' hall, but cannot reconstruct the social hierarchies that determined who sat where. Worker cottages survive in scattered condition. Some estates maintain the structures, converting them to modern housing or office space. Others let them decay. At Biltmore, several original cottages still stand, renovated and used by estate management. The community they once housed has vanished. 50 families who formed a complete village with their own social structure, schools, and relationships exist only in a few photographs. The tools and equipment that made estate operation possible have mostly disappeared. The specialized implements used by gardeners. The unique cleaning supplies developed for specific materials. The elaborate systems of bells, speaking tubes, and early telephones that coordinated worker activity. These practical objects were discarded as estates closed because nobody recognized their historical value. What museums choose to preserve reveals deliberate decisions about narrative. They restore and interpret family bedrooms, drawing rooms, and formal gardens. These spaces tell stories of wealth and taste. They avoid or minimize worker spaces because those tell stories of labor and exploitation. The Vanderbilt Mansion in Hyde Park offers visitors a tour of elaborate family rooms. The basement service areas remain closed to the public. The estate owns the spaces but does not interpret them. Tourists never learn that the marble bathroom they admire was made possible by workers living in basement dormitories with no plumbing. Some estates have begun addressing this imbalance. They offer specialized tours of worker areas. They create exhibits explaining the labor systems that maintain the properties. These efforts remain secondary to the main narrative of family wealth and architectural achievement. The physical evidence of worker lives exists in fragments. A few photographs showing staff posed formally, occasional letters or journals donated by worker descendants, fragmentary employment records listing positions and wages. These sources document that workers existed, but reveal almost nothing about their actual experiences. The most complete records survived at Biltmore because George Vanderbilt maintained detailed accounts. These show the numbers: how many workers, what they earned, what they cost. They do not show the human reality. They do not record the exhaustion, the resentment, the small rebellions, or the rare moments of satisfaction. Oral histories from worker descendants provide glimpses. A granddaughter remembers her grandmother describing 16-hour days. A great-nephew has letters mentioning the impossible hierarchy and constant fear of dismissal. These fragments suggest larger stories that remain mostly unrecoverable. The infrastructure that survives tells partial truth. The tunnels prove that estates were designed for invisibility. The massive boiler rooms prove that luxury required industrial-scale systems. The worker dormitories prove that staff lived in conditions wildly inferior to the families they served. But infrastructure cannot convey experience. It cannot show the 11-year-old hall boy carrying coal at 5 in the morning. It cannot capture the scullery maid's burned hands or the gardener's ruined knees. It cannot preserve the head housekeeper's pride or the butler's bitter resentment of the family he served for 30 years. The estates survive as architectural monuments. The workers survive only as absence, Tourists walk through spaces that required hundreds to maintain and never ask where those hundreds lived, what they earned, how they endured. The silence around their lives is the final invisibility the system imposed. The tunnels remain empty, silent, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Chapter 11: The Economics We Inherited. These estates failed because they attempted something that remains impossible: sustaining luxury through human labor alone in a democratic society. The system collapsed not from moral awakening, but from economic inevitability. Democratic societies eventually offer workers choices. In Workers with Choices, reject positions that demand invisibility, exhaustion, and status subordination. The estate system required workers without options. When options appeared, the system died. But the system did not disappear. It evolved. Modern estates exist. Properties of comparable scale to Gilded Age estates still operate today. The difference lies in how they hide their labor costs and environmental impacts. Technology replaced workers. Automated heating systems eliminated boiler room crews. Modern HVAC requires one technician quarterly instead of 3 workers feeding boilers daily. Automated irrigation eliminated gardening crews. Computer-controlled systems water elaborate gardens with 1 programmer instead of 20 workers with hoses. Automated security systems replaced night watchmen. Cameras and alarms monitor properties with nobody walking patrol. The reduction is dramatic. A modern estate comparable to Biltmore operates with 10 to 15 workers instead of 80. Those workers are technicians, not servants. They maintain systems, not the family. They work normal hours, receive benefits, and go home at night. The live-in servant disappeared almost completely, but labor still exists. It has just been outsourced and made invisible. Cleaning crews arrive weekly from service companies. They clean for 8 hours and disappear. The estate never employs them directly. No worker cottages, no staff hierarchy, no visible reminder that labor maintains the property. Landscape services replace resident gardening crews. Companies arrive with crews and equipment, maintain the grounds, and leave. The estate writes a check monthly, but never sees the workers. The invisibility is complete. The environmental cost has been outsourced similarly. Estates no longer generate coal smoke, but they consume electricity at rates that would shock Gilded Age owners. Climate control alone can cost $50,000 annually for a large property. That electricity comes from power plants that create environmental damage somewhere else. The estate remains pristine while shifting pollution to distant locations. The economic model shifted from consumption to investment. Modern wealthy families buy estates as appreciating assets, not consumption displays. They expect properties to increase in value, offsetting operating costs. When that calculation fails, they sell immediately. The emotional attachment that kept families funding impossible operations no longer exists. The tax structure changed incentives completely. Gilded Age estates existed in an era of minimal income tax. Families could spend unlimited amounts on properties without tax consequences. Modern estate owners face high income taxes that make lavish consumption economically painful. They seek tax deductions, conservation easements, and other mechanisms to reduce costs. Some patterns persist unchanged. Status display still motivates estate ownership. The ability to own and maintain a significant property still signals wealth and power. The difference is scale and visibility. Modern estates typically range from 10 to 50,000 square feet instead of the 100,000 square feet of Gilded Age properties. They exist in gated communities or remote locations instead of prominent public positions. The workforce hierarchy persists in modified form. Estate managers still exist, coordinating contracted services instead of supervising live-in staff. The manager might earn $100,000 annually, similar to historical superintendents when adjusted for inflation. Below the manager come contracted services ranked by proximity to the family. Personal assistants, household managers, and private chefs occupy positions similar to historical upper servants. Cleaning crews, landscape workers, and maintenance technicians occupy the invisible bottom tier. The workers still do not live on the property. They commute from working-class neighborhoods to wealthy enclaves, performing their labor and leaving. The spatial separation that kept Gilded Age workers in cottages now keeps modern workers in distant towns. The result is identical. The wealthy never confront the daily reality of the people who maintain their comfort. The fundamental dynamic remains. Wealthy people consume services that require labor. That labor must be performed by workers paid less than the value they create. The wealthy prefer not to see those workers or acknowledge their lives. The system evolved methods to accommodate that preference more efficiently than the Gilded Age managed. What changed is the fiction. Gilded Age estates maintained the pretense that servants were part of an extended household. Modern estates acknowledge that workers are contracted labor. The hypocrisy is more honest, but the exploitation persists. The economics prove that extreme luxury requires invisible labor. Technology reduced the quantity of labor required, but could not eliminate it. Someone still cleans. Someone still maintains the grounds. Someone still provides personal services. Those someones remain as invisible as Gilded Age scullery maids, just more efficiently hidden. The legacy of Gilded Age estates is not architectural. It is the proof that democratic societies cannot sustain aristocratic lifestyles through visible human labor. The solution was not to abandon luxury, but to make the labor supporting it invisible through outsourcing, automation, and spatial separation. We have not eliminated the system that maintained America's grand estates. We made it more efficient at hiding itself. Chapter 12. The names we never learned. We preserved the buildings, the furniture, the family portraits, but we lost almost every name of the people who made it all possible. Estate employment records from the Gilded Age list positions, not people, the head gardener, the second footman, the scullery maid. The records document that these positions existed and what they were paid. They do not record names. Photographs of estate workers exist in small numbers. Groups posed formally, often arranged by hierarchy. Butler and housekeeper in front, chambermaids and footmen behind, hall boys and scullery workers in back. The photographs show faces but rarely include names. Museum archives hold these images labeled only as staff group, circa 1905. The individuals are anonymous. A few workers achieved documentation through unusual circumstances. Those who committed crimes. Those who died in accidents on estate property. Those whose families donated letters or journals to archives. These fragmentary records suggest the larger absence. For every worker whose name survives, hundreds remain unknown. The contrast with family documentation is absolute. Estate owners maintained extensive records, family trees, biographical details, business correspondence, personal letters, photographs carefully labeled and preserved. Multiple biographies have been written about major estate owners. Their lives are documented in granular detail. The workers who made those lives possible remain unnamed. This was not accidental. The system required worker invisibility. Naming them, acknowledging them as individuals with lives and stories, would undermine the hierarchy that made the system function. Workers had to remain interchangeable positions rather than unique people. The head gardener could be dismissed and replaced. His expertise and decades of experience were subordinate to the family's convenience. The architectural legacy amplifies the absence. We preserved dozens of Gilded Age estates as museums. We restored their rooms to period accuracy. We maintain their gardens. We interpret their architecture and decorative arts. We tell elaborate stories about the families who built them. We say almost nothing about the hundreds who actually kept them running. Tour guides at the Breakers describe the Vanderbilt family in intimate detail. They explain Cornelius Vanderbilt II's business career. They discuss Alva Vanderbilt's social ambitions. They analyze the symbolism in room decorations. And they spend 90 minutes discussing the family. They spend perhaps 3 minutes acknowledging that servants existed. They mention that the property required staff. They point to the servants' wing and move on. They do not name a single worker. They do not tell a single worker story. The tour presents the estate as a monument to the Vanderbilt family, with servants as background texture. This is not unique to the Breakers. Biltmore tours focus entirely on George Vanderbilt's vision and his descendants' preservation efforts. Worker stories appear only when specifically requested, and even then, guides can provide minimal information because minimal information was preserved. The ethical question this raises is profound. What does it mean that we can tour these estates, spend hours learning about the families who built them, and leave without learning the name of a single worker who made their beauty possible? It means we have internalized the hierarchy the estates created. We still believe that wealthy families matter more than workers. We still think their stories are worth preserving while worker stories are not. We still operate within a framework that treats labor as invisible infrastructure rather than human experience worthy of documentation. The absence is not just historical, it is philosophical. We have decided that certain lives matter enough to preserve in detail, while other lives can disappear without acknowledgement. We make this decision constantly when we choose what to document, what to interpret, what to remember. The workers at America's grand estates performed labor that created beauty. They maintained buildings that we value as cultural achievements. Their skill, dedication, and exhaustion made possible the preservation of architectural treasures that we visit and admire. And we have forgotten almost all of them. A few names survived. Chauncey Beadle, head gardener at Biltmore for 60 years, is documented because he stayed through the estate's transition to a museum. His longevity and the estate's institutional commitment to record-keeping preserved his story. He is an exception that proves the rule. The thousands of other workers, the chambermaids and scullery workers, and boiler room engineers, and stable hands and laundresses and footmen and hall boys are lost. Their names did not matter enough to preserve. Their lives did not seem worth documenting. They were designed to be invisible, and we have made their invisibility permanent. The legacy of America's grand estates is not just architectural or economic, it is moral. It is a demonstration of whose stories we choose to preserve and whose we allow to disappear. It is proof that we can live surrounded by beauty created through human labor and never ask about the people who performed that labor. The estates survive as museums celebrating the families who built them. The workers who actually kept them running remain as anonymous as they were designed to be. We walk through their tunnels without knowing their names. We admire their work without acknowledging their existence. We benefit from their labor without granting them the dignity of remembrance. This is the final invisibility the system imposed, not just during their working lives, but forever. The estates erased them while they lived, and history erased them after they died. We preserved the buildings. We lost the people. And that loss reveals who we think matters.